Maybe it was because they're like it's going and so sweaty. It's hot.
Okay. Wow, there's quite an echo here. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out of the woodwork on this Thursday late afternoon. There's plenty of sugar and coffee. Help yourself. This is a CBO Hugh Hanson ecology seminar. I wanted to mention first that this is being recorded because we are having a workshop this week with our colleagues here from Ecuador, and Lenfest Ocean Program, who is supporting the research, would like to see the presentation. So we're recording it. Therefore, when we get to the Q&A, please speak up. So today I wanted to introduce Dr. Susana Cardenas, who I met 2 years ago while on sabbatical at Universidad de San Francisco de Quito. I was lucky enough to have a Fulbright fellowship at the university and quickly met Susie, and we started many different projects. We're working together. We have a project in Galapagos on marine protected areas, helping the national park develop guidelines for monitoring and managing the marine reserve. We're also working in Panama on a project related to whales and ecotourism. So I'm pleased to have Susie here. She's going to be sharing some of her work on evaluating preferences towards marine endangered megafauna. Susie did her undergraduate at the same university. You're testing me here with saying this quickly in Spanish multiple times, but at USFQ in Quito. And then she went on to do her both master's and PhD at UC Davis. Her master's was in resource economics and her PhD was in ecology. And then she went back to Ecuador and has become a professor and is very prominent in the scholarship around marine conservation in Latin America. So happy to introduce Susie.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. Thanks, Leah, and thanks for the CBO to have the pleasure to be here and share part of this project. Yes, as Leah said, we started working a couple of years ago in Ecuador, but what I'm going to talk today is related to a project, and it was part also of my dissertation at UC Davis when I was a graduate student there. And basically, I will talk to you about these ideas of how to value preference. It will be related mostly to tourists, but preference for marine endangered species, marine megafauna, and how this can be connected with promoting conservation for this type of large migratory species, endangered species. So, more or less, to begin with, what is the issue with endangered marine megafauna? As you may know, we have this global marine assessment that was completed in 2015. So we have more or less globally 13,000 species assessed, and 15% of them were threatened, right? So it's a growing concern about what is the status and the threatened status of these marine endangered species. Here in my area of focus will be the Eastern Tropical Pacific, which extends from from Mexico towards northern Peru, this region of the Eastern Tropical Pacific. And in this region, more or less 12% of the species, the marine species, are threatened with extinction. So it's becoming a very important topic for marine conservation. And this is one in general, what we wanted to approach in this study. Within those 12% of species, of marine species threatened in this region, migratory marine species are of great concern. And this is because they are moving between all these regions and moving from protected areas to non-protected areas, as we will see soon. So this is the area of emphasis of most of our projects, and this project is this area in the Eastern Tropical Pacific. So this is the light green area is what we call the Eastern Tropical Marine Corridor, that is part of of 4 countries, the economic exclusive zones of 4 countries, Ecuador, Colombia, Panama, and Costa Rica, right? And here we have some protected areas and the rest of the areas that are not protected, right? That are for economic use, mainly fishing. So the main protected areas are Galapagos, the largest one in the region. We have also Cocos, right? Isla del Coco, I hope you have heard about, that's from Costa Rica. We have Malpelo, and that's another protected area, marine protected area around and in Colombia. Then we have Coiba National Park in Panama. Those are the main 4 marine protected areas. And then we have other little protected areas, I don't know if you can see them here, that are along the coast. But you can see that mostly the coast of these 4 countries are not protected, right? They lack a lot of protection. This light blue rectangle here is part of a new swingway, a new protection that they are trying to establish between Malpelo and Coiba, to try to put a marine corridor between these 2 marine protected areas. And actually, we were talking last week in a congress in Lima that actually they are already implementing that swingway, of that protection between the 2 marine protected areas. So the idea in the whole region is to start expanding this marine protection, especially to protect migratory marine species. Why we want to do this? Because we have already of other teams mainly focusing on tracking these migratory species and see how they are moving. They have been proving the connection between these different marine protected areas. This is, for example, some tracking data that shows connection between a sea turtle from Galapagos to Cocos, right? So we are starting to find more and more evidence of this connection between these. This is the graph turned, I don't know why, but this should be here. But this is for sharks also, and it's showing connection between Galapagos and Cocos, right? And basically this ecological data and movement data is showing us that these 2 archipelagos are very connected, and these migratory species move beyond marine protected areas, right? So for the study, we focus on 2 main marine endangered species, the green sea turtle and the scallop hammerhead shark. Both of them, why we focus on them too? Because both of them are formally listed as endangered by the IUCN. The green sea turtle since 2004 and the scallop hammerhead shark since 2007. So both of them have the same level of threat according to the IUCN, the formal red list of endangered species. And in general, maybe for all of you is, you know that these 2 species are threatened by fisheries bycatch, in the case of the green sea turtle, coastal development, especially in the coastal mainlands, because of they are threatened because in these beaches there where they are nesting, right? In Galapagos, they are not threatened inside Galapagos too much in terms of coastal development, but as in the mainland, but they are also threatened sometimes by boats strikes, or mostly increasing transportation between or in the same routes that they have. And also outside the marine protected areas, we also have egg harvesting of sea turtles. It's a little, but this is something that is still being going on. In the case of the hammerheads, of course, we have the fisheries bycatch, we have fishing pressure, especially for juveniles, and especially a lot of fishing pressure for juveniles in the mainland of South America. In our country, in Ecuador, we have a lot of reports, right, of juvenile bycatch in the main beaches. So, and also in Central America too. So it's a really high pressure for the juveniles. And also we have shark finning, right? And illegal shark finning. That's something that we still see in the news sometimes, illegal boats with shark finning near or outside Galapagos, the reserve, and in the whole area. So these are the main threats. So they are, the threats continue to be there. And for the two species, what is protected, right? We have the protection in the marine protected areas, more or less, right? But you can see that these, okay, there are other, we have already some data that show that there is some movement from Galapagos to Cocos or from in this area, and also key places in the coast parts of the mainland of Central America and South America, Northern South America, but these areas are not protected. So we can see that there is a need for more protection, and there is a lot of efforts and initiatives to trying to enhance the coverage of MPAs and networks of MPAs in the region. And also, we have that in that region, we have a lot of tourism. Tourism is increasing, right? It's increasing in the whole region, but also in the MPAs within that region. In Galapagos, where we were focusing the study, we can see that within the region, that's the main point of tourism, right? The main focal point for tourism. Just some background of the numbers of the increasing tourism in Galapagos. This is one of the last figures up to 2018 that was presented by the Observatory of Tourism in Galapagos. So you can see that in the 1979, more or less, we were like well below 50,000 tourists, right? And now in 2018, last year, we reached like 278,000 tourists. So it was really a big increase. What is very interesting as well is that in the past, we had a lot of tourism that was mostly cruise-based tourism, right? But in the last 20 years, we have seen a very interesting increase of the land-based tourism. So the tourism that is happening in the towns, based in towns, and also it has created and promoted a lot of increasing infrastructure, hotels, other services related to tourism. So, and now the tourism that is based on land-based tourism actually accounts for 70% of the tourism in Galapagos. So it's a very important shift in how tourism is happening in the islands. But so we have this increasing trend in tourism. Tourism is one of the different potential values that we can have from biodiversity of ecosystems, right? So maybe you are familiar or not with this classification of values. So we have use values, the values that we directly get from biodiversity for species or from ecosystems. And we have also non-use values, right? Could be these existence values, these values that we have for our future generations, bequest values, of these option values that basically can be used or non-used depending on how we're going to use these resources in the future. But tourism is part of the direct use values, right? We have consumptive use values and non-consumptive use values. And in case of tourism and recreation, we are here, right? So we wanted to focus this, to try to get these type of values. We understand that there are many other type of values related to these species and to these environments, but we were focusing the study on that specifically, on tourism. And there are other studies. There was one study that was published in 2015 that tried to get the direct economic value of tourism compared to fisheries, and specifically for sharks. And according to this study, just for example, they said that the economic value of the legal fisheries in Galapagos was around $4.4 million, right? But in terms of marine tourism, and most of the marine tourism was focused on looking and going to see these big megafauna, marine megafauna, account for $154 million, right? So basically we were comparing that the tourism value is much more important in Galapagos than the legal fisheries value, right? So that was one part. So they covered that direct use economic value. We were more interested in trying to see how much people value these species, this intention to see these species, also conservation and protection of these species. So we wanted first, this is just a graph that is showing how important is looking at these species for tourists. And basically, we can see that is high important, right? So sea turtles are the main species the tourists are going after, according to our study and to the sample that we have in 2015. And but sea turtles, marine iguanas, sea lions, and sharks are where the highest species in terms of importance to see from tourists. So we wanted to go beyond this direct use value from tourism, and we had other questions that were: what are other benefits of marine protection? Are there preference and values for the protection of marine endangered species significant? So we wanted to value this preference from these stakeholders, the tourists. What is the willingness to pay for the recovery and protection of marine endangered species? So we formally wanted to measure willingness to pay estimates. What factors influence on tourist preferences? And what are the policy implications of valuing tourist preference for the conservation of these species? How this can actually be applied for policy. So what we did, we use an approach, a non-market valuation method. I know how many of you, if you know about valuation methods, we have market valuation methods, that are the direct reveal preference methods that we can have because of our behavior in the markets. But when we have these other type of values that are not directly seen in the market, we use another methods that are called non-market valuation methods. So we have the famous contingent valuation that was very used in the past, but it has been very criticized because it has a lot of biases. And lately, one of the most one of the approaches that is used more recently is these stated preference choice experiments. So it overcomes some of the biases and some of the ambiguity of the contingent valuation. Is still a hypothetical method, but we wanted to try to use it. It was not used before in this setting in Galapagos, and we wanted to see what results we can get. So the method itself has a good theoretical foundation. We basically ask respondents to choose the most preferred among two or more alternatives, and these alternatives are characterized by different attributes. I will show you some examples to make that clear. Some of these attributes are described at different levels and combination of these levels, and then we try to put realistic alternatives to see preference from different, in this case from tourists. And price or cost is one of the attributes. So that makes it possible to actually get this willingness to pay estimate, right? Because we can have marginal willingness to pay estimates for each of the attributes that we include in our valuation scenario. So that's why this method is really useful, and also is preferred over other methods, because it can give more specific marginal values of the attributes that we are trying to measure. So in our case, the evaluation scenario, in general, the evaluation scenario should be really linked to the goals or to the research goals of the study, right? And in this case, we wanted to estimate the economic value by identifying how significant are the preference of tourists for different levels of protection and recovery of these two endangered species in this region, right? Because it was not good to just focus in Galapagos when we know that these species are migratory and actually are covering a broader region. And for this, we set up evaluation scenario to represent the current threat status and future recovery of these two marine species. And for that, we use the IUCN framework of the threat status. And also, we wanted to represent a conservation program that will allow the recovery of the status, right? So for this, we created this hypothetical scenario of increasing regional protection, because sometimes for this valuation, you have to have a valuation scenario, right? So this was our scenario. So it was a new conservation program that we put in place and that would improve the status of these two endangered species in the region. This program will involve the creation of new marine protected areas or a network of protected areas in this region. That was our region of study. And we want this potential expansion of marine protection will also make possible that we get improvements in the conservation status of these two species. So here we wanted to focus on improvements, and that was because we wanted to have very specific attributes and ways to measure these attributes. So that's why we focus on improvements to the current endangered status of these species. And for this, we wanted to increase the protection of these marine species, right, in the region. So just the methodology is very long for these stated preference choice experiments, but I just wanted to show you the main things, the more relevant components. Here as attributes, we selected the ICUCN population status, right? If it was endangered, vulnerable, or near vulnerable. We have risk of extinction. When we did all the focus groups and all the testing of the initial versions of the approach, we selected these among other things that we tested in the field, right? And also we included two things. We wanted to see more as a methodological question. We wanted to see the difference between marine conservation fees or donation. The economic literature really prefers to use a vehicle payment that try to reduce the bias of free rider. So that's why we wanted actually, and the most important for us was marine conservation fee. That's what we use. And then we also had different levels of these attribute, specifically the price attribute for Latin American tourists and non-Latin American tourists, because they also have different purchasing power, right? So this graph shows a little bit how these attributes were divided and the levels of these attributes. So right now the species are in danger. So our hypothesis is that if marine protection increases in the region, they can reduce that threat. We can reduce that threat, and they can become less threatened, either vulnerable or near vulnerable, according to the IUCN categories. And also the probabilities, the extinction risk probabilities can be reduced, right? And for that, we have many different combinations of potential prices that will help to increase marine protection. So we did this stated preference choice experiment questionnaire for each of the species, because we wanted to do formal comparisons between them, because that was another hypothesis that we had. This questionnaire was based on other similar questionnaires that NOAA worked in the past as well, and one of my advisors was also related to NOAA and this big project of valuing especially marine species here in the US, not here in the US. We had these are the sample sizes for each of these two surveys. This is basically what I'm going to present for you is the marine conservation fee scenario. So this was only for the fee. The board questionnaire were decided through a very long process to try to reduce as much as we can different biases that we have in this questionnaire. So how we are very careful with the language, how much information we put, all the different strategies that we have to reduce the hypothetical bias of choosing some answers. So we did a lot of versions to try to come with a design and a questionnaire format that reduces as much as possible those biases. For the survey implementation, all of our tourists in Galapagos live from the two airports. So it's a very nice way to control all the population of tourists. So then we selected randomly different tourists. We work in the two airports in 2 seasons. The questionnaire were self-administered, so the tourists did it by themselves, but they were overseen by researchers in the 2 airports. And it lasts more or less from 12 to 20 minutes. This is an example of one of the questions. So this is several questions of this because these are different choice questions. And the idea is that you include the background information and then you put to the respondents different options, right, from them to choose. And then we can see the main difference between these stated choice experiments and the other methods that were used before is that they were just open questions. And the respondents were giving any potential answer. But here you already, with all the design and with all the pilot process, you try to see the range of prices, of the ranges of the cost attribute that are more significant, and then you can have also better and more precise estimates. Now, if we review a little bit of the findings, that's only the choice questions what I showed you before. Well, we try to collect much more information that can also explain the preference from the respondents, in this case of tourists. So some of the general findings, when we were asking them about the attitudes towards marine endangered species, we wanted to see how important was for them to protect these species, and we could see like 70% said that it was extremely important and 25% more or less very important. So most of them were really into conservation. And that's one important thing that is very linked to Galapagos tourists too. So we also were doing some analysis and try to more or less have the profile of these tourists, of the people that go there as tourists. So how concerned are you about endangered species in the study? So they were extremely concerned or very concerned. We will see that there were some difference there between the sharks and the turtles, because we don't only ask divers about this, but also the whole, we sampled the whole population of tourists in Galapagos. Another findings were in terms of knowledge, right? How have you heard about the species, its threats and protection measures? So this was showing that also they were very well educated, because most of them know, especially about sea turtles, they knew a lot, right? But there was still some 30% that they didn't know about these species and the threats and protection measures. Also, are you aware about marine conservation efforts in the region? That's very interesting because they didn't know. No, that was 90% of the tourist survey didn't know about how these species are being concerned. Most of them know that where they are within a marine protected area, and that is fine, but they didn't know about all these threats outside and how they affect the species. A very interesting thing, and this is relevant to some of the conclusions at the end that I will show you, is that have you been a member or contributed to a conservation organization? And it's very interesting because the tourists in Galapagos, they have been involved in conservation, in donation for environmental organizations. So it's more or less half and half. So that's very interesting. It's different from other areas, but we have done this type of studies as well. So more or less half of the tourists are involved in conservation actions, right? Have you been a member or contributed to a conservation organization? That's the same. Sorry. It didn't change. So, but it was high. So here are some of the findings in terms of the willingness to pay estimates. So we wanted to have, and this is why these stated preference choice experiments are important, because you can have the whole range of different scenarios, right? It's not just one value for the whole question that you are asking, but these many different scenarios, because you are combining all these attributes in different levels, and then you can, through modeling, you can estimate all these different willingness to pay depending on these scenarios. So the most important thing, these are the results from green sea turtle, right? We can see that the willingness to pay vary from $53, right? It was one fee because it was an addition payment to the fee. They already pay a fee to enter the Galapagos, but within the valuation scenario, that was another fee that they paid only for marine protection. So it ranges from 53, right, to depending the scenario. So from the middle improvements, this could be considered as middle improvements from endangered to vulnerable, they were willing to pay more. And this is logical, because it gets to a point where they they are okay for paying, but not too much more, right? So then for the highest improvements, the estimate a little bit reduces or decreases. So those are all the ranges, the mean values, and the confidence intervals for all these willingness to pay estimates. All of these were significant, so this means that there is a positive and significant preference or value for conserving these species or for recovering these species. In the case of the scallop hammerhead, we also saw more or less the same pattern, right? And actually, when we do the formal comparison for testing, if there were statistical significant difference between these two species, we didn't find. There were some attitudes or some interest in seeing or highest motivation for the turtles in some cases, but in terms of willingness to pay, actually the estimates show us that there were no statistical significant differences between the two species. The other thing that we tested is that we wanted also, because when we did this study, we also wanted to see if actually this can inform potential sources of funding mechanisms for these regional conservation. So we had a variable when we asked them also if they were willing to donate, right? So this was a separate analysis from the willingness to pay estimates, but we wanted to test this willingness to donate a variable that is a qualitative measure of the desire or intent to contribute for the species conservation. And we wanted to see if different characteristics of these tourists as motivation, attitudes, beliefs, past donation patterns, and also individual characteristics influence these donation patterns or this donation intention. So for that, we also did some we did some analysis and models to see what are the factors that influence more on willingness to donate. And we have clearly that it was the level of concern for these species, the beliefs that they really want that they are endangered and they don't want them to become extinct. It was another important one and very significant, but also the past donation behavior. Actually, this is one of the main drivers that influence willingness to donate, and also if they were Ecuadorians or foreigners, being it highest for foreigners, right? So these are, in summary, the main factors or the main drivers that influence willingness to donate. It was attitudes and beliefs, concern about the species, protection for the species, motivation to see the species, and that was specifically important for the scallop hammerhead. So we found a specific group of tourists, and it was correlated with their marine experience that really had a very high motivation to see these species, and also had a very high significant. It was a significant factor for future donation, and also past donation behavior. And we found that many of these tourists in Galapagos already were connected to conservation work or actually have donated in the past. They were really, that was an important factor for predicting future donations too, which was very obvious. So what are the policy implications of these results? These provide useful information on how are the tourist preferences in this area, how different they are, that's heterogeneity of preferences, and if that was important to see if actually is significant or not. So in the case of Galapagos, I know we are very biased as a special area and a specific type of tourists too. So these preferences are significant. We included two species in this study, right? Both of them are umbrella species, means that conserving them also help to conserve many other species in the range where they live. So if we try to promote conservation programs focused on these species, their protection will benefit other species as well. And that was one of the main drivers for trying to link this type of analysis with potential mechanisms for funding these regional initiatives. And this data on tourist preference also, as I told you before, will guide funding strategies, right? There are many things that we are working right now in the region to trying to initiatives to expand protection in the region. This is one example of it. We are now working on this idea of a swingway between Galapagos and Cocos. We have been doing also other evaluation in terms of the opportunity cost of fisheries for this area that we completed that last year. But also we are trying to prove that there could be other mechanisms for secure funding for this initiative, or maybe to compensate fisheries. And considering that tourism is the most important economic activity in the protected areas, but if we want to try to do these initiatives of connecting and increasing a protection in some way where the other main affected stakeholder are the fisheries, you will have to create this interesting mechanism to how to redistribute these benefits, right? So this is what we are now. Before, when we started the analysis, this was not a reality yet. It was more just, it was a regional, it was an idea of expanding marine protection. But now this idea of the Galapagos Coco Swingway is already being presented, is being analyzed, and maybe something that we will be working more in the future to make it happen. So all these studies will also be supporting this value, and how the different preferences are also an important indication that people or different actors really are good like to make protection happen, or protection extends in the region. So this is just a very quick summary. This was done by a lot of help with, well, it was part of the Packard Foundation initiative too. I was part of this Latin American and Caribbean Environmental Economics program, and is trying to see how we have different mechanisms to value different services, different species, but and also different types of ecosystem services. So if you have more specific questions on the methods, on more details on the results, I am very happy to answer that. So I think I was too fast.
Questions?
So I guess that not everybody responded to the questionnaires, and that could have led to a situation where you only got responses from people who cared.
Okay, that's a really good question. So when you are doing this type of service, you have to control for that, right? Well, actually, we had, in Galapagos, I have been doing service for tourists in many different times, and we have a very high response rate, usually. So our response rate here is from 75 to 80%, which is really high. But also what you do, you have to be, when you are doing this, you have to be comparing to the representation of your survey. So basically you have to keep doing to have a good representation of the survey in terms of the population. So for us, it's very easy because all the tourist information, especially for the tourists that enter Galapagos, is recorded very well. So we know exactly what is the percentage of female and male tourists, where are they coming from. So then your sample has to be representative related to those variables, right? And that's what we always check that. So in this case, we had the response rate was, as I told you, depending on the group survey, because we have the hammerhead, the turtle, the donation version, and the fee version, and then we had from 75 to 80 response rate, which is really high. When you do these studies, sometimes response rate is 40, 50, and that's very high. So we have a good response rate. Another important advantage of doing this in the airport is that they have some time to wait there. So it's very, actually they don't have anything else to do. So they say yes. Okay, so that's very convenient for us. So we have been doing right now, we do every 5 years, we do the expense survey, the tourist expense survey in Galapagos, and also there is even higher. We have like 85-90% response rate. So we are lucky in that sense, but we do control for that because that's very important.
Very nice presentation, thank you. And it's a very well-designed study. And as someone who does social science, I'm jealous of some of the setting in which you get to do your surveys and the control that you have. So that's a great opportunity.
Yeah, that's great.
What is the response from the policy community in Ecuador in terms of conversations about implementation of some of these recommendations to expand the marine protected areas, to actually implement potential new fees or requested donations to follow through with the recommendations?
Yeah, well, at the moment, it's not an option. Why? Because actually the government is considering, and is also already news, to increase the fee. So the Galapagos Entrance Fee is gonna, well, the study for increasing the fee was done some years ago, but it was not increased, but now is a decision that will be increased soon.
It just increased.
It just
200. It was 100.
It's not yet implemented,
Oh,
but it will. It will be soon. They already announced it, but the studies were done like 5 years ago or something like that, but they haven't implemented yet. But that's something. So they are trying first to do that, right? So now we have presented this more in the context of our regional marine conservation strategy, but it has to be. So we know that it's significant. So the willingness to pay is significant, is positive, but of course for implementing that, you have to follow a whole different process, right? So with the authorities, also you will see how that can be implemented in terms of the effect on tourists. We know that the tourists in Galapagos, the number of tourists, especially the foreigners, won't change too much. That's why they have already, and they proved that with the other study of increasing the fee. So it's a very inelastic demand. So, but not too much for the Ecuadorian tourist and the Latin American tourist. So it's something that is an option, is an alternative. But now the first step is increasing the fee, the entrance fee.
And
so
can I ask a quick follow-up? What's the rationale, the reason for the fee increase that's existing? Is it for raising additional revenue because of the increase in tourism and the need to provide it?
So
to control the demand, I know you say it's elastic for
we would like to control the demand, but we have seen in Galapagos that this just the trend is increasing, right? But yeah, there are two things. To try to control the demand, we don't know how much we will control at the end, because
for the international companies, you're right.
Yeah,
much.
And also, but there is a need also for funding. So there is a need to increase that fee. That fee has been for many years, so it hasn't been adjusted. The government needs funding for many of the work that and monitoring and control and surveillance and all the different activities that they do within the protected area. And also that fee doesn't go only to the park, but also to the other institutions, public institutions, and part of it also goes to the central government. Now that is a problem, but definitely it's for increasing revenue, right? And also, one of the key things that they analyzed when they were doing the study for increasing the fee is that compared to these other key places for tourism, Galapagos was still low. So you compare, for example, with places in Africa or in other these main destinations, right? And Galapagos is one of those in terms of nature tourism, is still low. So in that case, you do have room for increase. We will see how it will affect other groups of tourists, Latin American. Ecuadorians will not be affected because it will be an increase, but not as much as for tourists. Tourists will be basically 100% increase. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you said this, I missed it. But did you do interviews on the way in or on the way out at the airport? And then do you think that, would you be interested in, or do you think there'd be a difference for people having maybe already experienced these organisms in the wild or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did just on the way out.
On the way out?
Yeah, not in the way in. It was sometimes, we had that question too. It will be very interesting to compare the before and after. But also we wanted to correlate this with experience. And how was their Because I didn't show, but some of the other data that we have is how many species they observe, how many individuals of these species of interest compared to others, because all of that influence what you're, and there was a very significant influence on that, especially on how many they see and what they saw and how many they saw. So, but yeah, that was for the study we didn't do that before, but that's an important consideration. Yeah.
So did you see then when you say it was significant that the more they saw, the more
Yes,
willing to
completely.
So then it's like a positive feedback
Yeah.
too, and can make recommendations.
Yes. And well, in Galapagos, they see it. So most of them see everything. So here, Paola is a tour guide in Galapagos, and she knows that it's a place where if you don't see something, is a low probability, right? Especially for these big and key species, right, Paola? Yeah. But it does influence how many you see. Like if you saw like a very big school of hammerheads in Darwin diving, of course, you never will forget and you will be willing to contribute more. Yeah, that's good. Great question.
I don't want. Okay. So I was thinking because you were talking about the ETPS seascape and the need for coordination for megavertebrate conservation, and then somehow taking the revenue from these the tourism to fund that. And I was, it makes sense conceptually, and it makes sense in the Galapagos. The user fees go to monitoring. But how does it work at that scale? How would it work? What could be, like, how do you, who holds the money and disperses it, and how does that work?
Yeah, well, that's something that for implementation of this idea, you will have to set up very good rules. Right now, at the moment, there is this corridor, right? This corridor is the Corredor Marino del Pacífico Tropical. This is actually, the managers are the governments of these 4 countries. And they're starting to think in this framework of a regional conservation for all these area. So the idea will be to have a formal way to handle this at that level, right? Of course, it cannot be only from Galapagos. It has to be and how the scenario was built was as a regional conservation, right? Because Galapagos is already protected. You need to go beyond Galapagos. But of course, in the case of implementing a strategy like this, you have to go to an instance that is regional.
But is there already an infrastructure for that?
There is already.
Is there already some sort of government institution
Yes.
that takes
The SEMAR.
Oh.
The SEMAR started in 2000. The SEMAR started like 10 years ago. Actually, that's why also the Swingway, the Galapagos Coco Swingway, now is taking shape, because they adopted that as an idea. So, and it's already an infrastructure, is a group, right? It doesn't work completely well because they have a lot of challenges to overcome and a lot of things to work on. But the idea is that they really get coordinated, they improve all their management. They are now working, they already, for the first time this year, like a few months ago, they already completed their operational plan and all the main things that they are going to be working in this regional scale for marine protection. And so it's moving. So it's going to be a process that still has many things to solve and to improve, but there is something already in place. Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering if you've done anything similar on, like, maybe comparing a species like the hammerhead shark and an endemic species, like what's like kind of the threshold, like are people willing to pay like double to protect an endemic species versus a migratory one?
We have not done that directly, but there is a person who did a similar study, but for giant tortoises in Galapagos. So it was also non-market valuation, how much will be willingness to pay for conserving and expanding protection for giant tortoises. So yeah, you can do it, but our approach was a little bit different because we were focusing in these migratory marine species, trying to see this protection that is needed beyond the existing protected areas, and how this, if this was important or not to tourists, for example, and to people. We wanted to do also for residents, to see this preference and the value this preference for the people living in Galapagos in Ecuador. But the funding was not available for extending that. But at some point we would like to do, because that's the other part. And that will not be capturing, because tourists are already have another relationship with these. Is a use value because they were already there, they were enjoying recreation there and everything, but in terms of residents or communities is different, right? It's trying to have other type of values there, and we are still interested in doing that and focusing more on the residents and communities, local communities. But we haven't been able yet to. We need funding for this type of studies to do it well, to do all the steps, to have a good sample size, and so at some point you will get funding for that. For right now, it was, for that moment, it was very important for the tourist point of view, and that's why we focus only on that sector. Mm-hmm.
So we're the same people answering the surveys on the sharks and the turtles, and do you know if they're willing to pay a certain amount for the turtle, then are they willing to pay on top of that for the shark?
Yeah, we did also, another version was the combining both. So we did actually 3, because it was an experimental design. So we did shark, turtle, and the shark plus turtle. Yeah, so we wanted to test also that. And actually what was interesting, it was neither in the combined version or the separate version, the difference were not significant. So our explanation for that is that at the end, when you are asking for donate, they just want to donate, but it's not significant the difference between the species, right? So because using both the mixed version and the separate version, both of them show that. This was more like a methodological and that approach that we wanted, because we were comparing different payment vehicles, different species, but it was interesting also because it was informant that at the end, the most important conclusion is that the values and the preference are significant, at least for this population of tourists, right?
Any other questions? Oh, please.
So you mentioned that you're doing some work on kind of what is the opportunity cost from from the fisheries perspective of these corridors.
Yes.
I guess kind of 2 questions. One, if you could say a little bit more about that and maybe how those magnitudes compare to the willingness to pay you find to actually implement the corridors, and then like if you were to implement this for sharks versus for turtles, would they look different at all, or sort of like spatially would you extend the protected areas in exactly the same way if you were targeting sharks versus the turtles?
Well, in terms of what you target for protection, for example, in the case of the sharks, we know these areas that they're using and how they are moving. That's why we are basing this also, especially for the marine protection and where you put these corridors, that you have a biological justification depending on these studies on movement, right? But there is a difference though with the turtles, because some of the areas that are more threatened for the tortoise are these coastal areas, these beaches in the mainland, right? That are not too link with the sharks. Although the sharks, there are some nursery areas, no beaches, but maybe mangrove areas along Costa Rica, along Central America and Northern South America, that also are important mangrove areas, and that nurseries for sharks. So their habitats are a little bit different, but you will have to, what the biological information is showing us is that what will be the main habitats for protection, right? That will be an informed decision based on the ecological and biological data. For the other question that you asked me about the opportunity costs, yeah. So what we did is what for this Swingway that I show you for this one here, what we completed last year, we only had data for the industrial fisheries, for the tuna industrial fisheries, and basically the data from the tuna commission, right? So what we did there was, if we according to the biological and ecological studies, more or less, it will be the potential area for this swingway, for this corridor. And then there was especially explicit data for the fisheries of these two countries, of Costa Rica and Ecuador, because this involves only Costa Rica and Ecuador. These are the economic exclusive zone. This is the limit of the economic exclusive zone from Ecuador, and the other one is from Costa Rica. So we get those data, and we try to compare the fisheries income. We did it for 6 years. For the two sections of the swingway, the section in the Ecuador and the section in Costa Rica, and then we compared those values with the whole fisheries value in the whole economic zone of the two countries. So actually, what we found out is around 7% in that area. So we know that, for example, for the Ecuadorian case, the most important area for fisheries is here, is the west. So that was logical, the values that we had. But what we did at that point only was that opportunity cost for the fisheries. If you implement like total protection, but total protection was not also, it's not feasible in that area, right? So the next step for that is to see if this idea moves forward. You will have to think if you will have a spatial regulation within that corridor and what could do. So maybe more specific analysis or only temporal protection or spatial protection inside that. But that was a first analysis that we compared, and basically was from the tuna fisheries, because that's reported data. And we could get access to that. One of the main problems there is that we couldn't get data for the artisanal fisheries, and that we have a very high impact on that area. They use that area a lot, so we are trying to complete that, because that's not that information was not available in a spatially explicit level. Yeah, but that's important.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank Susie. We are out of time, but she'll hang around for a couple minutes in case there are additional questions. And thanks to everyone for attending and for the great questions.
Thank you.